fired up here and make sure I'm doing my thing right. All right, you guys can see that okay? Thumbs up? Sweet. Well, let's move into this. Mitchell gave me a pretty amazing introduction, so I might hire him and take him with me as my, MC to announce me everywhere I go. I have had 23 years with Walt Disney Imagineering, amazing time, but 30 years overall within the industry. I started in film and TV and moved quite a bit of theme park work with Universal, between Universal and Disney, until I finally landed in 1997 at WDI Imagineering and stayed there the whole time. I have worked on 3 continents, which has been quite amazing experience, learning how to tell stories in other cultures so that you're telling relevant stories to those cultures. I thought was pretty amazing. Let's jump into this course. I think Mitchell also mentioned that I'm the founder of a company called the Designers Creative Studio, and should probably explain that. With all of the layoffs that came to the Disney company, unfortunately, I was a part of those layoffs. 28,000 cast members total. Out of Imagineering, it was over 400. And that's kind of the way that it goes in our industry sometimes, especially when something like COVID hits. Nobody could possibly plan for that. And, our whole job is to build new product for the company. And when you can't even pay your bills, that's the last thing you want to do is invest a lot of money in new products. So it kind of makes sense. So my venture is Designers Creative Studio. I work in a lot of different areas. You're just seeing one where I love to educate. I do teach for several universities in the US as a guest educator. I will be dropping courses on my website in January. As I explained to Mitchell, it is all the things that you don't learn in school. It's everything that'll help you once you land a job, some things that'll help you to land a job in the industry, but all the things that you need to know once you get to the industry. So if you subscribe to the website, you'll have exposure to my blogs, which I talk about twice a month, and newsletters and some other things, and quite a few other products. So I created this whole kind of presentation based on questions that people ask me. How do you do what you do? We don't know how that you do. You have a really cool job, but how do you do it? So to really talk about that, I really wanted to get into the basics. So this is Themed Entertainment 101, right? This is the basics. So let's start by asking, what is themed entertainment? It's a huge industry. It encompasses many markets and lots of different businesses. Right? So themed entertainment refers to the creation of an artificial environment where various elements bring to life a thematically driven story for the purpose of immersing visitors in a strongly identified or branded setting. Visitors enjoy this experience as a form of escapism and play. This definition is important because we're gonna go back to it throughout. So let's start with some of the key components that make up the industry. So the obvious ones first are theme parks, right? When you think of themed entertainment, probably the first thing in your mind you go to is theme parks. Probably the first thing you think of is what I would call a legacy brand, which would be Universal or Disney or Merlin parks. Those are the parks that have been around probably the longest. They spend the most money. They really do it right. Well, we know that Walt Disney opened Disneyland in 1955, and that kind of was the birth of a theme park. Now, just to make sure that you understand the difference between a theme park and an amusement park, when I say theme park, that indicates an experience that is choreographed like a show from the moment that guests arrive until the moment they leave. There's no accidents. Everything is there for a reason. The distance between attractions, the distance between shows, all of that is choreographed and planned in a story. And it's not just a collection of rides like you would find in an amusement park. They are customized immersive stories. All of these things have been stitched together and told through different mediums around a central theme. Next, let's look at water parks. That's maybe another thought that you had when I said themed entertainment. Water park as a venue has grown exponentially over the last 10 years, even 15 years. Water parks now feature attractions, story-based themes, and even exotic locations. Some water parks are completely covered and they offer year-round experiences. Some feature aquatic life that seem to swim beside you, like what you see in the Bahamas. Even private island destinations that you can only access through cruise lines also feature water parks. So it is very definitely a part of themed entertainment. Finally, what I would consider the last entry in sort of the obvious category are hotels. Many locations now feature designs that are based on story and integrate experiences to emphasize the story. So I think about like Animal Kingdom Lodge, Aulani in Hawaii, and of course, the Galactic Star Cruiser that's going to be open in Walt Disney World, just to name a few. Now, these locations have definitely created artificial environments, just like in our definition, and have used theme to bring the stories to life. There's a meaning to the story. That's what theme means. There are other great examples throughout the world. I just chose Disney because it's kind of obvious to illustrate these points. So let's move on to some of the categories that you may not have expected to be included in the category of, or the industry of themed entertainment, starting with casinos. So if you've ever been to Las Vegas or maybe Macau in China, these locations have created venues that offer many of the same experiences that are found in a modern theme park. And they've implemented them with a high level of investment and really good quality. These entertainment cities have casinos at the heart of the business, but they are infused with attractions and lodging, dining, retail, and entertainment, all with an effort to keep visitors on their property and to drive business. Most of these venues are thematically designed and even story-driven. Some of these properties are really hybrids since they combine multiple elements in one place. So we've looked at a couple so far, water parks and casinos. However, one of the most notable hybrids is the retail, dining, and entertainment properties. Places like Americana, Disney Springs, and Chelsea Market represent the creation of destination experiences that feature all three elements. Typically, these locations are also aligned with a single story or theme. Disney, of course, you're going to see a lot more of a theme like what we have at Disney Springs. Chelsea Market is kind of an adaptive reuse theme that leans into the true history of the actual place. Many of these properties also combine residential components as well, so that there's a level of customer base that's kind of built in. Retail and dining spaces are surrounded by entertainment venues, fountains, park-like settings, all of that to encourage longer visitation time. Think about cruise lines. They've also increasingly added attractions and features that are traditionally found in theme parks really for the last 20 years. These attractions, entertainment, specialty dining, and retail all support longer cruise itineraries and, you guessed it, higher prices. Larger and more complex attractions have also found their way onto cruise ships, and these offer guests even more to do once on board. Cruise lines also have really innovated their technologies to create even more what we would call frictionless travel, where you find escape rooms, full IMAX theaters, roller coasters on the ships. It's kind of amazing how many of the traditional theme park elements you would find on a cruise ship. Some of these are very story-based. Cruise ships, especially Disney, have highly thematic areas for children, for multiple ages of children. All those are based on characters and stories. So when you think of themed entertainment, you should be thinking, hopefully you're seeing very, very broadly. The last category I have here and sort of the bigger elements that make up themed entertainment is what we would call animal parks. So even animal parks differentiate themselves from traditional zoos by creating immersive habitats, not just for visitors, not just for guests, but also for the animals. Attractions, live entertainment, elevated dining, and retail are now featured in many of these properties, and all of them have story and theme that support the animals that they showcase. So Animal Kingdom certainly is the best example of this hybrid type venue, but SeaWorld, Ocean Park, Atlantis, and Chimelong animal parks in southern China are also great examples of this, and they really exemplify this fusion of all these themed elements with animals. So let's take a quick review here of some of the things that we've learned. The core principles of themed entertainment really talk about artificial environments, right? Another core principle would be that they need to have a thematically driven story. There needs to be elements that bring that story and that environment to life. These environments and stories need to be immersive for visitors, for guests. And the environment represents the company's brand. I have another whole lecture that I give on dimensionalizing brand. And so every single one of these environments are carrying a part of that brand story with them. And then finally, you have to reach out to leverage escapism and play because humans visit the parks, and escapism and play is a core component of what all humans want. These are core components to our design. Next, I want to go on to what I'm calling the component fields. So if those were the big industry headers, there are component fields that make up the world of theme entertainment. Now, a great synergy develops when these industries all come together and contribute to the creation of immersive and dimensional stories. So let's start with the first component field of media, which is really like film and television. If you think of Walt Disney, he actually started the creation and design of Disneyland by staffing the very first team of Imagineers with filmmakers from his studio. These were animators and live action specialists, and they used these highly refined skills to create the first dimensional environments that told stories like a film. Think of all the themed experiences that you've ever had that leverage the medium of film. So not only is the industry based on the techniques of filmmaking, but also the medium of film is used in telling many theme park, water parks, all these attractions. There are also that media, that discipline itself is used in the creation of themed experiences. So another one of these component fields is augmented and virtual reality. We call them mixed reality, right? These technologies are being used in themed experiences a lot more frequently. And even in some real technological breakthrough cases, the need for wearable devices has been completely eliminated. And some of the stuff that Disney's done, you can actually move into a scene and have that level of augmented reality without even wearing goggles or VR. Super, super cool. So even if you think about the media itself that's generated for these technologies has really improved to the point where it's nearly indistinguishable from reality. Now, what's different about that is I'm sure you've all been to IAAPA or trade shows or maybe regional theme parks that have simulators. And when you look at that media, it's like, oh yeah, that somebody designed that. It's really good animation, but somebody designed that. It doesn't feel real. Well, these days we have way far surpassed that, where the actual media that's used in these mixed media experiences far surpassed. I mean, they look real. I think of Flight of Passage at Disney's Animal Kingdom, right? That feels like you're really in the film. Or Pirates of the Caribbean in Shanghai Disneyland. Insanely cool, immersive imagery. Here's the thing though, that really costs a lot of money. It's a big investment. That's why you don't see that showing up everywhere. Now, of course, over time, as the technology becomes easier to make that, to deliver that level of media, it'll become a lot more prolific. But you won't see that level of quality only in the real legacy brand companies, because they're the ones that spend the money to do that. So if you think of the gamification of themed experiences, it really has existed for some time. It's become more mainstream with attractions like Buzz Lightyear's Space Ranger Spin or Midway Mania, or even if you go in the Wayback Machine into one of the attractions I worked on was Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, right? It's a live show. You're right in the audience and you can vote along with all your audience members and actually affect the outcome of that particular experience. Interactive gaming technologies have also been created to add dimension, story, and dwell time within themed lands, attractions, and cruise ships. Anybody that's been to Black Spire, right, the new Star Wars lands, can actually tell you have a game on your phone that actually you can choose if you're on the dark side or if you're on the rebellion side, and it really takes you into a much deeper way within that physical experience. So these companies are now using, the legacy brands mostly are using that, not only in theme parks, but in water parks and in cruise lines. This allows the guests to experience a real deeper dive into the stories and into the characters. So here's one you may not have expected: the museum and display industry. It's overlapped with themed entertainment world for many years, with both segments benefiting from the collaboration. So what do I mean by that? Well, museums now create immersive, sometimes highly themed environments that deliver a more of an emotional connection for guests to the exhibit. Most notably, I think about Epcot Center's World Showcase that houses rotating collections from multiple countries, alongside themed attractions, performances, and immersive films, all representing these cultures. So theme parks have museums, and museums are creating experiences, leveraging all of the elements that we use to create themed experiences. Not all of them are doing this, of course. You look at the Louvre or something like that, that has a very high-end budget for representing displays and these environments that exhibits, but you do see quite a lot of that. And professionals from this industry work in the themed entertainment industry as well. Now, when you see this title of simulation, probably the very first thing that comes to your mind is the mechanical systems that actually help create incredible experiences like The Amazing Spider-Man, Star Tours, or Indiana Jones Temple of the Forbidden Eye, my favorite attraction. And you'd be right, that simulator actually sits on a motion base that moves through. And that's why in the title here, you'll see vehicle bases. But simulation is a medium that's used in quite a few other areas. So think about pre-visualization, where project teams will pre-visualize buildings, attractions, maybe even large dimensional icons or elements in a scene, or even a virtual ride-through experience. These types of things have been assisting design teams all over the world to develop themed experiences more efficiently and more affordably for probably the last 10 or 15 years. Another one here is flow modeling. A good friend of mine at Disney is actually a designer who creates flow models through attractions, through ships, basically through anything, retail stores. And that actually shows how many guests move through the space. And there's, all kinds of super sciencey, mathy type things that I'm not very good at, that programs in to show how guests move through a space. So simulation as a category has actually played a big role in themed entertainment for quite a long time. Finally, live performance. Now this probably goes without saying, but live performance is really a standalone art form, and it's been around since, as you know, Greek and Roman times. These experiences have greatly evolved over time and have become much more immersive, as well as integrated into all these themed environments that we talked about. Cirque du Soleil, for example, is a perfect example, not only through performances and for music, but acrobatics and lighting and incredible projection on characters. If you think of live performances beyond the stage, start thinking about parades, of course, stage performances, acrobatic performances, characters, but live performances appear quite literally in pretty much every place that we've looked at. Animal parks, I've seen them in water parks where we have parades that come through and do music, character meet and greets, of course, theme parks, and also cruise ships. All of them feature some form of live entertainment. But I want to make sure that you don't just think about this industry in terms of a collection of businesses or industries or subject matter experts. There's a really critical element that ties everything together and makes an emotional connection with guests, and that is story. That's probably the most essential element to the entire plan here. Anything that is created as a themed environment or an experience really does require story. In these applications, I believe it's more than just what happens and who lives here, as a definition of story. Story can be a powerful tool to create solutions, deliver on business objectives, and connect a brand to a consumer in a unique and meaningful way for life, right? If it's done right, that's the goal. If you're a product designer and you design a toaster, it could be a super sexy, very cool toaster, but it's not making any emotional connections with consumers, right? As themed experience designers, we have to solve problems. We have to remember we're in a business. And what we design has to make a connection with guests. We do that through story. In this context, story can be used to create any dimensional space where humans interact. It can be as simple as a guiding principle that dimensionalizes the brand, as I mentioned, or as complex as an attraction focused on a time and place with characters and a theme. I really do think that this is the most essential part of what we do in themed attraction design, or themed entertainment design, themed experience design. And that can be applied in retail, it can be applied in attractions, it can be applied in cruise ships, casinos, etc. One of the things that I want to talk about story is really the benefits of story. So let's first think about this in terms of the vehicle to deliver business goals. As I mentioned, we as designers, we swim upstream in the project process to verify the client's program, and that allows the team to create a story that delivers great guest experience, but also incorporates business goals, right? That then becomes, pardon me, that becomes the project's framework. The story becomes the overarching guide for each discipline. So when you understand the brand, you understand the brand's audience, and then you understand the brand's business goals. Those three elements combined, wrapped with a story that delivers those three elements, that becomes the framework that guides the team all the way through the entire project, right? Each discipline will align with that, from concept to architecture, ride engineering, to cast training. Story really, in this sense, becomes the North Star for every single decision on the project. Really important thing. Think about the fact that it actually delivers on the corporate brand experience. This story framework guides how the project will deliver the brand experience to the client, and therefore gives marketing, the marketing department of the client that you're working for, gives that marketing their initial direction. How are we going to tell this story to guests and get them to come and buy a ticket to see what we've made? And then finally, it actually creates narrative for the guest experience. Now, what I mean by that is it tells a relevant story for guests. It connects those guests emotionally to the dimensional experience. Otherwise, it's just an amusement park, right? And those are cool. I love roller coasters. I love amusement rides, but I go there with the mindset that this is an amusement. This isn't a story. And I think that's where we have problems sometimes within the industry. Not to cut any company down or anything, but you know, buying an attraction off the shelf from Intamin or you know, P&O or Zamperla or whatever, painting it a color and calling it a hero's experience, probably the wrong representation of a story for that hero. Just make up another name, you know, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious experience. Then nobody has any expectations. They ride a really cool roller coaster. They had a great time. It's worth the money, and we move on. They weren't expecting something from the hero that they saw in movies and that they play games with. It's just a wrong mindset. So if we do this right and we create the right narrative for guests, wrap it in story, then these guests will want to return over and over to have that experience again and again. This is where this point makes a lot of sense to you guys, because in a sense you are global, right? Usually give this presentation to Americans, and I'm always telling them that as a reminder, the themed entertainment industry is a global industry. Most developed nations feature this form of entertainment, whether it's Asia, the Middle East, which by the way is a huge development right now going on, the Soviet Union, Europe, the Americas. All of this means for each of you is that there's enormous potential out there for you. Not only is there all of the different fields, all of the different types of themed experiences, but the industry takes place all over the world. One of the most important things to remember is that as creators of these experiences, we need to consider many things before we start a project, many, many things, as I mentioned a bunch of them. However, culture is really one of the largest influences on design and storytelling, right? I've worked in Paris, France on Disneyland Paris, expanding that park. I've worked in Hong Kong and expanded that park and built an entire organization there for really the first generation of Chinese in that part of the world. If we weren't telling stories that were relevant to that audience, nobody would come back. You'd come in one time, you go, kind of cool, take a bunch of pictures and leave. But if you didn't know what the stories were about and they didn't resonate with your cultural understanding of the world, you know, what's the use? So I always kind of close on this, specifically when I'm talking about the industry as a whole, because it helps to guide your mindset when it comes to themed experience design, that you have to make those adjustments when you're in a different place from where you live. People interpret stories and they interpret lots of things very, very different. You can get it wrong really, really quickly, especially as I found out in Asia, right? Every 5,000-year-old culture, everything means something. It's a shape, it means something. It's a number, it means something. It's a color, it means something. And you don't want to go sideways thinking you're doing the right thing based on your own cultural filter, and you deliver something that, in fact, doesn't resonate with guests. So that's kind of the important close that I have for you on that. As I mentioned, website, blog, all that good stuff. But I really want to take time to go through your questions. That's the most fun that I have in any presentation. And even if you have questions that don't relate to anything within my presentation, that's fine too. If you want to just know about the industry or anything like that, I'm totally fine with that. And with that, Mitchell, I'm going to stop sharing and give you back the screen.
Lily, thank you so much, Theron, for a really wonderful presentation. Please give Theron a round of applause, the hand clapping emoji or whichever works. So in the meantime, we actually have a question from Mitchell, with the other Mitchell in the call, Mitchell Swills. So we're going to go to him. He'll unmute himself and ask his question.
Wait a minute, two Mitchells? You didn't tell me about this.
I know we have a doppelganger here, I guess.
We fight for the superior Mitchell quite often.
Capital M Mitchell.
Exactly.
Sorry, go ahead, Mitchell.
Anyway, so it's nice to meet you, Theron. So I have a quick question. So I know you've been working for quite a while, 23 years in the industry and whatnot. So how has really the process changed from, when you first started to now, it's always a story first approach from what I understand and get through, but with, technologies and everything changing, how has the process even changed, or, maybe a little bit of more insight on that?
That's a great question. Pardon me. What I would say is that the core process for delivering a project within the realm of themed entertainment really hasn't changed much. And I think that's a really good thing, because if you start looking at, again, another presentation I have is about the influencers on project teams, right? And one of the couple of things that I showcase is that film itself, right? That's where the whole entire industry began. So the culture of film is a pretty big influence over that process. We're setting a scene. That scene contains characters. There's a story. That story should have a theme. Theme isn't, we paint it yellow because that's not theme. Theme is the meaning to your story. Heroism, a rescue. It's humans versus nature, right? That's the theme. That's the inherent meaning of your story. So if we use all of those elements within designing themed experiences, and we do that to, when you think about the actual process that we use, that comes out of the construction, right? The design and build industry. We have architects, we have engineers, we use, a concept, feasibility, design, build. We use a process that exists that doesn't change. If you build anything in your garage, you're basically doing that. You conceived it in your mind. You may have sketched out the dimensions. You went to the hardware store, purchased what you want. You actively build it. You stand back and it works. So at the very rudimentary level, that happens in themed entertainment. So the creation of a story is critical, and then the process that we use to deliver that story is critical. The good news is, by having that process stay consistent, you can now apply that anywhere. Any place that I mentioned, whether it's a casino, a water park, a cruise ship, a theme park, animal park, now you have the ability to work in any of those places because you're telling that story and you're using that same process. So I think in general, that's what I'm hoping that you'll take away from this, is once you nail that process, you really understand it, you can then take that anywhere. And there's multiple ways for you to enter that process. If you're in the building trade, that's where I came from, was building, and I happen to be really skilled as an artist. You enter that way, and and you kind of grow in that way. If you're a filmmaker, if you're a producer, you get the idea. You can enter from so many different entry points and use your skills and passion for what you love and apply it in that way. So long answer to a short question, but.
Thank you for that, Theron. I believe Connor has a question next, so we'll go straight to Connor.
Hi, can you?
Hi, Connor.
So I was just wondering how you felt about kind of the balance between cutting costs like Disney has had to do recently with the layoffs and just kind of generally, obviously their revenue is down this year. And they're typically famous for like their immersive experience, and they had all these live shows, they had stuff like the Dapper Dans, and they had, all kinds of stuff like that. So I was wondering how you felt about like striking a good balance between not overdoing it in terms of what it might cost to run the park and still providing like a good experience for all the guests.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a great question, actually, and I really appreciate and respect the fact that you're asking a question that's based on the business. That is, I mean, I'm a creative executive, right? My whole career and everything it sees this whole world through the creative lens. So if there's anybody on the project that's not going to care about business, it usually is on my side of the house, right? A lot of creatives, and I spend a lot of time educating creatives, because I don't want them to get into a project and stumble, right? That $300 million project budget or $1 billion or whatever it is, that's not your private fund to have art time, right? And to play. It's a business. So, Connor, I really appreciate the fact that you asked it from a business perspective, because as creatives, as members of the team that are a part of the design process, technical, non-technical, right? So that's creative, design, delivery team, just as the core. You can't get too emotional about that, I think. At the end of the day, it's an operator, it's a client, they run a business. Would I like to see things done differently in the business? You bet, lots of times I would like to. I think a disruption in that emotional connection that I mentioned between the guests and the product, the brand, a disruption in that is really hard to get back, because at the core of that is trust. And even Walt said, if we don't get it right and we lose guests, it will take, years to get them back, and it'll cost us a lot of money. We'll have to spend to get new things to attract them back. So it absolutely requires a balance. I don't think I'm in the position where I can comment on the validity or my opinions of the decisions that the company's made. I'm not in those meetings. I don't understand the pressure. I don't have, I won't armchair quarterback that. I hate it when people do that about my projects. You weren't sitting there in front of the client when they told you were 40 million over budget, and where were you? I had to make those cuts. You didn't, So those are hard. I can tell you that in general, most everybody wants it to be the best that it can possibly be. I mean, if you look at a legacy brand like Disney, Disney's at the top tier of what I'm about to explain. Then comes Universal, and then the others kind of cascade under. Think about this in your own life financially, right? This is a company that spends literally billions of dollars, and they don't see a return on that investment for sometimes 6, 7, 8, 10 years. In the case of a theme park, you're investing, you don't turn a profit for years, right? Very few companies on earth can afford to do that, and can afford to spend the amount of money to allow us to build that level of detail and storytelling in that's so famous. Our Disney's famous for that. Universal has a level of fame associated with that, but not as much. And then you go down, Lego Park and others, don't have the same level, right? They have other aspects of their brand, attributes of their brand that they're famous for. So I don't know if I've answered your question or not, but the core is you absolutely have to strike a balance. The way that the business is run is not really the concern of the project team. We do all of what we possibly can to understand the business. That's what I meant by swimming upstream. When I start, they hand me a program, and the operator says, here's what we want. And the maintenance people say, we want to do this. And, the retail people and everybody. So instead of starting concept, I turn to those individuals and I start interviewing them, because I really want to understand what they believe they want. Because at the end of the day, if I don't understand what they want, I can't possibly design a solution that they'll agree with is the right solution, right? I could paint a cool picture, I could, sell this really cool ride concept, but if it doesn't deliver on their business objectives, and I'm my own boss, right? They're not going to hire me again because I'm not going to do it right. So anyways, that's how I kind of see the differences that way. All of us extremely passionate about Disney, its heritage, its fundamentals. It is unique on all the earth that way. And there's you get a lot of emotion around stuff. Like when you close Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, for example, man, you get a whole lot of people that aren't happy with you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Sure, man.
There, we have a question from Michael in the chat. So of course you worked in so many different locations on Earth. You've been all over the world now. Michael wants to know, how do you educate yourself and bring yourself up to speed on learning on the new cultures that you work in? Wherever that may be, whether Hong Kong or Paris and beyond.
Sorry.
No, absolutely, go ahead.
That's a really great question. Really important. A little bit of a backstory on Paris. I was there in '91 working on Pirates to build the very first park, which was super cool. And then went back in 2006 and expanded the Walt Disney Studio Park with Hollywood Boulevard, Stitch Encounter, Tower of Terror, that whole big studio expansion. And when I got that assignment for the 2006 one, it was because the individual that was doing that job had a family emergency and had to leave and could no longer be on the project. That individual, that art director, creative director, had been there for years. That all through the design, all through everything, had moved to Paris, had got it all set up. So literally when I came in, that team needed direction, right? So, I mean, my first day in Paris, walking into my office, I hadn't even been in my office yet. There was a line outside the door, unbelievable, with the people that wanted answers. So I think that feeds into one of the kind of the key things that I like to present, that I think that all of us should have as a principle in our own lives. And that is learn, adapt, and implement. And we should do that circularly. Every single day, to whatever degree possible, we should be learning new things, whether that's around things that we're passionate about. I love architecture, I love cars, whatever that, feed yourself with that. And then as you learn those things, you sometimes have to adapt the way that you've been doing things. And you should, that new learning should cause you to adapt and change, even if it's micro changes. And you won't really actually understand how well you've done, how well you've learned, and how well you've adapted until you implement. And a part of implementation is failure. Failure, it's so important, and so many people sadly are not being educated this way, and everybody thinks of failure as a really bad thing. But failure within a particular parameter is super important to your learning. Once you fail, then what do? You go right back to learning, and then you adapt, and then you tweak, and then, so that to me is so critically important, to be SpongeBob, right? Everywhere you go, absorb everything you possibly can from every single person. The person that empties the trash in your office might have a really cool idea that you never thought of, might have a perspective on the world that gives you inspiration in some way. And the CEO may not have any good ideas at all, right? So I think that's a really important principle for life. So when I found out I was going to Paris, the company helped me with some quick cultural training, what was taboo, what was accepted. I got language training. I actually learned French faster than the teacher was teaching me, just from working from my team members, right? There's several people, and I know you guys know this, who especially Parisians were embarrassed if they're not proficient in English. They don't even want to try. So they won't hit you with any English. So I made agreements with many of them and said, look, I'll speak only French to you. You speak only English to me, and we'll learn from each other. I worked pretty good because they never really spoke English. So I got French 2 ways. So anyways, I picked up French really pretty quickly, and kind of learned that way. Sadly, I didn't know how to shop in the market. All I knew how to say was rebar, concrete, paint, mostly true and kind of silly for my story. In Asia, it was completely different, right? A whole totally different culture. A saying in Asia is, the nail that sticks up gets hammered back down. So in Western culture, all of us, I'm sure your school is probably very similar to the way that I was, right? The teacher asks a question and people in the classroom raise their hand, because you want to answer the question. In Asia, you don't do that. This is totally disrespectful to all of your classmates. You don't stand up as individual. You don't stand out as individual. You work homogeneously together as a group. That was a real big life change in the way that I saw things, right? Because you can no longer go to your team and as a guaylo, as a white ghost, a guaylo, a Westerner, and sit in the meeting and ask, hey, so what's your idea? Because they're going to sit there and go, you know what I mean? So it's a totally different cultural approach. And I think to answer your question, I'm sorry I haven't been able to answer them very short, is that if you're passionate about learning, then you'll learn all that you need to learn ever for anything that you do. Every single project I ever had in my whole career, and that's over 30 years, was brand new. I'd never done it before. So when I got into film, literally HBO Pictures called me, hey, we heard from such and such, a person I worked with, that you're this, and we'd love to hire you as our lead scenic. Oh, sure, okay. You know, and I show up, and then I quickly learned. I learned how to sign paint, learned how to mural paint, I learned how to age and grain. Never did any of that in my whole life, and I showed up, and now I'm doing it. Same thing with Disney Springs. Never worked in retail, dining, and entertainment in an urban developed way. You quickly learn. Ships. I didn't even know the industry. So within 1 year, I learned the entire industry of cruise lines. I sailed on 8 different cruise lines in every single region of the world that our business sailed in. And I designed what's called the GA. It's the general arrangement. Anybody that's ever worked on ships, it's literally the floor plans. It's what's the sizes of all the spaces and what are the function of all the spaces. Now, this is sort of like the 3D chess in Star Trek, if anybody's a nerd like I am. You don't think of it in just a floor plan, right? It's multiple stacks and everything works together. So I did all of that in 1 year, right? You have to learn, adapt, and implement very quickly and be able to answer those questions and move with authority. And I have to tell you, Michael, I'm not some superhero, right? I was 50% terrified out of my mind with every single one of those projects because I never did it before. But I was also 50% excited out of my mind because I never did it before. And that combination caused a level of focus that drilled everything that I had known about anything into that role. And then it caused me I quickly saw the gaps where I didn't know, and then I could learn quickly. So I don't know, that's a long answer to a short question. So hopefully that helps.
Awesome, thanks, Aaron. I think we have time for 2 or 3 more questions. I think Samwise had a question next. Samwise, if you're still on the call.
Great.
Oh, there we go.
I'm still on the call. I just popped off video. This is a really cool talk, by the way. Thanks for doing it.
My pleasure.
Really interesting. My question is just kind of simple. Like, what are some more small scale type of themed entertainment jobs you've done? Like, just like maybe something at a mall or in a school. Like, what are like maybe these kind of opportunities for students that are, you know, something more accessible? Like, not everyone's going to just work at a Magic Kingdom right away. Like, how do you start off? What are the entry level things?
That's a really great question, man. I think I'd have to think back to my Disney MGM studio days. That's where I started, and literally in '98 was hired as the art director. And you get a lot of little small jobs. So that's a retail expansion. That's a restaurant expansion, or you tweak a story in an attraction, or you add a food cart. And for me, that was kind of my entry level. And what's cool about that is the investment level isn't as high as like the cruise line, right? That was over $4 billion that I was managing. That's just one part of that project. I had the other ships, the islands, all that stuff. So that's a lot of pressure with that much investment, right? I mean, so when you're working on a food cart, that might be 400, 500,000 US, maybe 800,000. And I mean, that's not chump change, and you got to get the business right. But that enabled me to really focus in on and kind of hone the skills and the storyline and the process that I was talking about earlier, right? If you have that process locked into your mind, it can really scale to whatever you need. So I'll give you a perfect example. You pick up a design job with a retail store, retail store X, and you meet with the client. The client explains, here's our product, here's what we want. It has to be cool, blah blah blah, this kind of thing. So you're going to want to know instantly, well, how many people? What's your ideal traffic that's going to go through here, right? You'd ask that question if it was the theme park, where you had millions of guests going through, or like Disney Springs, where the last time I counted, which I think was about 2.5, 3 years ago, 27 million people go through that place, right? I mean, that's way more than Magic Kingdom, way more than all the parks. So I would ask them, what's the traffic? I would ask them, what are you selling, right? Jewelry sells completely different than a soft good, a t-shirt, right? Totally different a product. And you would design the store differently with that. And then I would ask them, what about your brand, And then I would think about ways to take their brand and create a story around that brand. Disney Springs, we worked with tons of retailers that had never really done that before. I met with Lily Pulitzer and Zara, right? And I said, we don't want you to tell our story. I want you to tell your story. You've been in business for, 85 years. Tell me your story. Do it in a totally different way. And I don't know, that's kind of what I would do, because the process doesn't change. It's totally scalable. And your job as a creative person, as you're developing that story, is to really deliver it in a way that client's audience would want it. Not the way you would want it, the way that client's audience would want it. And that has to work for their brand and drive their business. I just think that's super, super critical. I meet a lot of students who are in creative field, and they're like writers or whatever. Or I love attractions, and I want to be hired by Disney, by Universal, because I can't wait to get in with that group and start thinking about all these great ideas. And I'm like, whoa, wait a second. It's not like 10 people sitting around in Hawaiian shirts playing with Play-Doh, drinking cherry Coke, thinking up ideas. They don't pay you for that. That doesn't happen. You enter the field with an expertise. It might be graphic design. It might be, drafting. It might be, anything, project management. You enter, and then if you're a generalist, if you love a lot of different things, then you actually get to kind of move around within the industry, the project team, and pick up and do lots of different things. So anyways, I hope I answered your question, but that to me is super critical. Nobody gets hired necessarily as a generalist. Hey, we want you to do these 10 things on a project. They're going to have an opening for a graphic designer, and then you get hired, and then you're like, hey, by the way, I can do lots of different things. And then, try to work your way to start doing those things and kind of demonstrating what you can do. By the way, I wouldn't be ashamed of starting anywhere. So another kind of misnomer is that a lot of people that I have met have blinders on for Disney, for Imagineering, and it's great. If you can get that job right out of the gate, more power to you. But I would really recommend starting wherever you can. If that's Knott's Berry Farm, if it's Six Flags, Legoland, there's no shame in that game. Anywhere that you start, Efteling, right? Go overseas. Any place that you start, you will start making contacts, number one. And number two, you'll start learning. You'll start failing early, which is what you should be doing. And building and learning. And you can always leverage all that experience on your resume or your CV for the next job.
We're going to go to our last two questions of the night. The first one is from Maria, who asks, how can you make sure the story gets adapted to local tastes without distorting the story too much? Do you need to infiltrate local cultural elements to adapt the narrative? So that's a lot of overlap with your previous question.
No, it's a great question. I'll use an example of Aulani Resort that we built in Hawaii. Right, that was Joe Rohde who worked on that project, and one of the very first things that they did before they even started designing was they reached out to the Hawaiian cultural centers, so poets and artists and designers, builders, any original Hawaiian-born, indigenous person. They really brought a group together to really talk about Hawaiian culture. And like I said before about Asian culture, everything means something. So, you know, Joe and the team asked those questions. Well, what is meaningful to you? How do you tell your stories? And learning from that, you then extrapolate patterns, materials, colors, shapes, layouts, forms, stories, and all of that can be distilled into physical elements, right? If you and I were talking about, Maria, if you and I were talking about a brand and the brand was safe or family oriented, right? The first thing that we would start thinking about before we even put pencil to paper is, how does the client define family oriented, right? Or safe? Is safe means there's handrails so you don't fall down? Does safe mean it's well lit so that you have a sense of safety when at night when you're there? You know, does safe mean that the content you'll feel confident showing your children, right? It won't, you know, possibly disrupt the way that, you know, giving them too much early, you know, violence or whatever. So that is so important about story and culture, is understanding the culture. Assuming that we know from wherever culture we come from, assuming that we know how to represent that culture is wrong. It's just straight up wrong. So going into that culture, it does require time to ask those questions and to try to get a really diverse answers to that questions. I really like Joe's approach, Joe Rohde's approach, because he sort of did the same thing when we were looking into building out new island structures. And that was going to the Bahamians and asking the same thing. You know, who are your celebrated poets? Who are your storytellers? Who are your musicians? Your artists, your artisans, your craftspeople? Let's put together a coalition of those natural born, you know, indigenous peoples of the area. And then let's have a dialogue with them. What are you passionate about? What makes sense? What would you like to see represented? And through that, you can distill really pretty much all the elements that you need to represent not only the story, but the story in a physical way. You know, that kind of thing. So I hope that answers your question.
Awesome. And for our last question on the topic of creativity, Michael was wondering what your creative process is like there, and what time during the day do you find that your creative energy is at its highest? Some
Great question. That's a great question. Well, I think the way that I would answer that is that I think creative people definitely have times of inspiration, right? Where you're like, oh, great, you know, boom, I got this idea. But the reality of working in a world that I just described to you as themed entertainment is you have to find a way for creativity on demand, right? I mean, you can't be like client A is sitting there and you've got $400 million, their program, and you're like, you know, she's not come to me yet. Just hasn't come. A few more days, I'm going to get this inspiration, you know, drink some kombucha. I'm going to be set. Really, I'll come up. That's not a world that we live in, right? So there are moments of real inspiration. There are moments of real creative, you know, explosion. I have all these ideas. And then there's moments where it's like, I got a deadline, dude, and I have to figure this out, right? That for me is where research comes in. I love research. My creative process mostly is about research. So Disney Springs is a perfect example. When we decided that the story of the venue itself was a town that kind of grew over time, well, that told me pretty much everything I needed to know from a framework perspective, right? Towns have a beginning. Towns grow over time. They have humans that live there. And those humans do things. They grow things, they sell things, they make things, they, you know, create stories, they have families, you know. So that really gave me the criteria that I could then create within. And I think that's probably what I wanted to leave with you the most, is that there are moments of sheer inspiration where you just have an idea. Sometimes that happens at night. And I've learned to keep my phone right by my bed. And when I do get that moment where I wake up, or sometimes I'll just have the wheels turning and I'll be literally designing in my mind, you know, this goes here, it goes like that, these things happen. I wake up and I write them down, or I sketch them. because I find what I found in the past, and I know this about myself, is that I'll forget when I wake up, and I'll be really frustrated. So I get up, I write it down. If it's a story point, I'll jot it down, and I take my time and I capture it so that I can come back to it later. Other times I have to put time aside to do that, and that is actually a lot harder. So in my role as the creative lead, you have a whole bunch of people that are waiting for you. Shouldn't be waiting, but they need you to give that direction. I can't go to the graphic designer and say, hey man, where's that sign? I've got to deliver that. And the graphic designer says, you haven't told me what you want. I mean, where is it even going? That doesn't work. So you have to have the vision and the inspiration to share. And I find that for me comes through lots of research. I really love to travel. COVID has been extremely difficult in that sense. A huge benefit in getting to spend so much time with my family, which is really important, that balance. But I love traveling the world. I love new cultures. I love new food. I love it, love it, love it. And that inspires me in a lot of ways. Colors, textures, language, people, architecture, automobiles, history, all those things. Almost every physical thing creates an inspiration of some kind. And I do keep a journal of those things. I do log those things. And then when it comes time for a project, if I'm studying architecture from the 1920s in South Florida, right, that's my criteria, well, then I know exactly what I'm researching. It's Addison Meisner, right? It's revival style, Spanish revival style architecture. It's plaster, it's tile roofs. And then I really dig in and understand that. So creatives, I tell them a lot, you need criteria to create within. Right? Think about art school. Anybody's ever been to art school? The professor comes in and says, today we're using oils. You're going to be having, I'm making it up, 2 weeks to deliver this painting. The painting will be on a subject of your choice, but you have a limited palette of colors, X, Y, Z, YJK, whatever. That's criteria. The paintings that I did the worst on in art school was when the professor gave us any amount of time we wanted. I could use any medium that I wanted. And I'm like, 2 days before the project was due, I'm like all night, right, painting, because that's just the way I think a lot of us are as humans. So having that criteria, how many people, what part of the world is it in? What are they selling? What's the brand? There's so many questions that you have to ask to form that criteria. Once you have that, then you can create within there. You know what you're creating. And anyway, so that's kind of my process. Understanding the who, the how, the what, the where, when do you need it done by, how much do you have to spend. All of that criteria begins to refine the process for me. And then I fill all of that in until I say, here's the story, here's the framework. And then that's when the fun begins, because then you can start designing. I know I've got architecture, I know I've got a ride experience, I have a show over here, got 3 retailers, I got some restaurants, and you can start playing around with how that comes together.
Awesome. Thank you again, Theron, so much for your time tonight, for sharing your insight with us and your amazing expertise on all things themed entertainment. And thank you all for coming to the event as well. I just dropped a link to Theron's website, so everybody should definitely check that out for videos, lectures, and courses on all things themed entertainment design and storytelling. And to continue your knowledge, your learning from Theron as well. So.
Thanks, everybody. It's really been a pleasure. I wish you all the best in your career journeys. I do start launching classes on my website in January, if I didn't mention that before. If you do subscribe, you'll have exposure to special deals and all that stuff, which I'm going to start off pre-selling at a discount for the classes if you're interested in that. But beyond that, I really do wish you all the best. Learn all that you can. And thanks for letting me come along. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you again, Theron, so much.
Okay.
Have a great night, everybody.
Thanks a lot, Theron.
Good night, everybody.